This morning, if you've ever been a victim of domestic violence or know someone who has, you'll want to hear what our experts have to say about a crisis of pandemic proportions.
This is the Emmy Award-winning 11 News Closeup with your host, Marvin Scott.
Good morning, everyone. We hear the stories of domestic abuse all the time. It is a major crisis in the United States. One that represents 15% of all violent crimes, with 10 million victims of abuse each and every year. And 85% of the victims, they're women. Men as well, as you'll find out, are victims of physical abuse. The National Coalition Against Domestic Violence estimates that during the time of this very program, more than 600 women will fall victim to domestic abuse. That's 20 people every minute. The crisis is of pandemic proportions. Something to be brave for is a new book that raises an awareness of the problem and provides resources and other guidance for victims. It's the story of one woman's harrowing tale of domestic violence and her ultimate escape. The book was written by Priscilla Bennett. She's a retired emergency room nurse who for more than 20 years witnessed and treated abused women from all backgrounds. Now, the goal of her book is to empower women to escape and to heal. Something to be brave for is a novel. The story, it's fiction, but the details are quite real. Now, here to discuss the crisis with us is Emily Campbell. She's an attorney who has been named one of New York's super lawyers for 2017. She has represented clients in domestic abuse cases. Audace Garnett has over a decade of experience working with victims of domestic violence in the New York area. She's worked in the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office and is well versed on the matters of domestic violence. Thank you so much for coming in. Let's start off by asking, why has this problem that has been so prevalent for so many years reached such pandemic proportions?
Well, people are afraid to talk about it. It's embarrassing. It's something that people want to keep private a lot of the time because they're fearful of retribution from the person that is abusing them, and that they think people won't understand. They feel very alone.
It's the problem is huge, but the social and economic conditions of our time feed into this and cause an increase, frustrations in families nowadays.
Absolutely, I would definitely say so. Also, there are several barriers for a person to receive the help that they need. But also, I want to speak about immigration. They've also said that there have been lower reporting due to, the immigration crisis, and people are just fearful to go forward and report due to things such as that as well.
Now, from my little bit of research, I find that it's a myth that only people of the lower economic strata, those who are in poverty levels, are the bigger victims, because this also involves those in the upper income brackets, the higher stratosphere.
Absolutely. Anyone can be a victim of domestic violence. It doesn't matter where you live, how much money you make, your educational background, what your race is. Anyone could be affected. However, if you do have the funds, the resources in order to, support yourself and to leave that relationship, you may be better able to leave. But anyone can be affected.
Now, the book that Priscilla writes, Priscilla Bennett's book, Something to be Brave For, it highlights the story of Kathy Gerard, and it's her affair and her relationship with this wealthy and this dashing young French surgeon. And it starts with love and it ends with hate, and it's a fictional story, but just so many people can relate to this. Basically, what it shows is that there's a very thin line between love and hate.
Right, and it also shows that it does, domestic abuse affects all different socioeconomic status. In the book, the person is of an upper socioeconomic status, but it just shows that it's not limited to people that are in poverty. And the people that are affected in relationships, as things often start out very well with people. They're feeling happy, they're feeling a lot of the attention. The attention that an abuser typically will perpetrate upon a victim is seemingly positive at the beginning. It's a lot of flowers and candies and those kind of loving kinds of things, but those things can turn into more of a controlling aspect.
So the question is, what is it that turns a loving relationship into such a toxic relationship?
That's interesting.
Oh, right. Either.
Well, the question is whether it was a loving relationship to begin with. The question is, what was the motivation of the person who was doing all of the quote loving things at the beginning, but with a goal perhaps to be able to control a person. Often the victims will become separated from their friends and family. The person will look at their telephone, check to see who they're talking to. I represented a woman in a domestic violence case that ultimately, unfortunately, turned into a homicide, and we had a battered woman defense, or as they call it today, an effects of battering. And that person that was controlling her was often checking her phone, seeing who she was texting, even things that were benign turned into an argument which ultimately would escalate into some type of violent exercise.
And this was a self-defense case, and she was acquitted? She
was acquitted. It was a 5.5-week jury trial in Manhattan several years ago. It was a very serious case. It wasn't, none of these situations are like the burning bed, like years ago, Farrah Fawcett was in a movie where she was sort of a shrinking violin and the person was just perpetrating abuse upon her constantly. Much of what happens in an abusive relationship is interactive, and that makes these cases very difficult because people wonder, why didn't someone leave? All of the things that you could imagine, like, oh, just pick up and leave. And it's not so easy when you're being psychologically abused as well.
Now, the statistics that are provided by the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, they're troubling indeed. Let me give you a couple of facts here. That 3 women are murdered on a daily basis. There's a 35% higher rate of domestic abuse among African American women, and 20% of victims murdered are people who try to intervene. The question I ask is, all right, you said before, Audace, that people are simply afraid to come forward and to share with anyone that they are victims of abuse. But what about a loved one who feels or is suspect that their loved one is being abused? And they just don't want to meddle, but they should get involved, shouldn't they? What are the signs they should look for to tell them that their loved one is being abused?
Well, everyone's situation is different, but there are several things that you can look for. Are there any changes in that person's behavior? Are they separating themselves from the family? What are the things that they used to do that they're not doing anymore? Is there a change in their mental health? Several things. What I would suggest that a family member would do is just listen to that person. Don't blame them. Never blame the victim, because you're going to shut them out, and you may be the only person that's available to listen to them. So just listen to them and find out, what they're going through.
Okay, I want to take a break.
Yeah.
When we come back,
Sure.
I want to take a few minutes for those people out there who feel that they are victims of domestic abuse and are just, as you said, fearful of coming forward, that there is help for them. There is a resource for them.
Yes.
We'll talk about that right after the break. Stay with us
Absolutely.
as PIX 11 News Close-Up continues. Back now with Audace Garnett and Emily Campbell, and we're talking about a tremendous social problem, domestic violence. Now, we hear about domestic violence impacting women, and predominantly they are the victims, but also I read 15% of the victims are actually men. Let's talk about that for a moment.
Right, well, statistically, that may be even underreported, because men are definitely not wanting generally to come forward. Women certainly don't want to come forward, but men, because of gender differences and perceived weakness when you report that someone else is abusing you, it becomes very difficult. So that may be an underreported number, but men are abused, and they're not only physically abused, but they're also psychologically abused, just like women can be. And people can be victims in lots of different kinds of ways. They can be victims of sexual abuse, they can be victims of psychological abuse, they can be victims of financial abuse, and obviously
forms,
physical abuse as well.
Now also, children are witnesses to this, and they too are victims. Some of the statistics there is that 1 in 15 children are exposed to domestic violence. Boys are exposed to it is twice as likely to become abusers themselves. And children exposed to domestic violence suffer physical and emotional problems. So that exacerbates the whole problem. It's not just the man and the woman, but it's the children who are living in that household.
It does. And Audace can talk about some of the resources available for families in particular.
Absolutely.
We're talking about this book, Something to Be Brave For, by Priscilla Bennett. If anyone wants more information about Priscilla, they can reach her at priscillabennett.com. And it's a fictional book, but the story behind the story is so real. And it's something that creates even more of an awareness, a program like this. And we have people out there, I'm sure, as you said before, who may be victims and just don't want to come forward.
Absolutely.
So, Audace, you work with NADAV, the National Association Against Domestic Violence.
Yes.
What guidance, talk to them out there, what guidance would you offer them? What resources, what help can you provide?
Okay, so I work for the National Network to End Domestic Violence, also known as NNEDV. What I would be able to provide survivors with is support around technology abuse. So if anyone is experiencing technology abuse, they can reach out to us at techsafety.org. For anyone that's living in New York City, you can definitely walk into any family justice center Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, to receive free services around counseling, case management, crisis housing, support for your children, immigration help as well. Family justice centers are located in every borough. You can reach out to 311 and find out the address as well.
Now, technical abuse, what technological abuse, is that what you said? Would you explain that?
Absolutely. So technology abuse. Technology abuse is just a new tactic, that is used. It's an extension that's added on to the abuser's power and control. And things could be done like stalking, monitoring, hacking into that person's accounts and things of that nature. Yes, so if anyone's experiencing that, you can go to techsafety.org, where we have survivor toolkits as well as toolkits for advocates as well.
So that's one resource. And
Yes.
then if you have to resort to it, you go to a legal resource, and that's where you enter.
Right. So I've represented people who are accused of assault, for example, and sometimes that's working both ways. Sometimes both parties will get arrested at the same time in a situation where there's a domestic dispute, because often the person who is being abused can fight back in certain ways that could also get them arrested as well. So there's the situation where someone has to hire an attorney, or I also serve on an 18B panel in Brooklyn and am appointed, and I serve on various pro bono cases as well. The homicide case I mentioned, I was second seating as a pro bono attorney. But in New York, there are lots of resources. There's Steps to End Family Violence, which is a project from Edwin Gould Association, as well as Safe Horizons, which is a place where people can get help. Families often have to, a woman needing shelter sometimes has to find a place where they can take also children, and there are shelters in New York where someone can go with children, that they don't have to leave their children behind.
I think the message that really resonates here is that if you are a victim of abuse, don't hide it. Come forward. Tell a loved one. Report. Call for help. Call NADAV.
Absolutely.
And that number again is 1-800-621-HOPE.
Let's see for right.
1-800-621-HOPE. That's for help in New York State.
Yes.
And any final guidance?
I was just also going to add, that Priscilla Bennett's book, on her website, she has other resources. There are other resources on the nnedv.org website. And Priscilla Bennett's book is benefiting, all of the proceeds are going to benefit NNEDV, which is a wonderful organization that helps people of all genders, races, socioeconomic status to end domestic violence.
So once again, give the title of that book, Something to Be Brave For, by Priscilla Bennett. She can be reached directly at priscillabennett.com.
Yes.
Well, thank you both, Emily Campbell and Audace Garnett. Thank you for your insight, and hopefully we got a message across tonight, and maybe this will help some people out there. Appreciate your insight.
Thank you so
Thanks.
much. Thank
We're
you.
going to take a break now, and when we come back, we'll be joined by our political analysts. A lot more ahead. Stay with us.